Miami luck strikes twice for Lando Norris, who claimed victory in the Miami sprint before Max Verstappen stunned McLaren yet again to claim pole position for the Miami Grand Prix. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. Now, Ian, I'm going to make something very, very clear quite quickly, because normally when we have a sprint race in qualifying, we'll kind of talk about both simultaneously, going back and forth, because it has a nice flow. Refresh, that's kind of impossible today, because wow, oh wow, what a sprint we had. So let's start by discussing the sprint race, which of course took place before qualifying, and more importantly, what happened about 30 minutes before the sprint race, and the most remarkable of heavy rain showers, which meant before the sprint even happened, we already had a crash and a driver out.
Yeah, Charles Leclerc, the unfortunate driver on this occasion, as you say. Heavens opens. You can see some dark clouds forming again just behind me here as we come to the close of the day. It's just coming up to 7 p.m. here in Miami, Hard Rock Stadium. Bit of the track there in the background, as you can see. Thought I'd give you another nice view, folks. So yes, what an amazing day. Starting with that lap to the grid. Charles Leclerc just aquaplaning off. No grip on those intermediate tyres. Plowed straight in a wall. Carried down along the track for quite a bit. Debris flew off onto the circuit. Absolutely no hope for him of competing in the race, of course. And then we had to wait. We had 2 formation laps behind the safety car. It was determined that the conditions were just too poor to continue. Rightly so. A great call by race director, FIA race director Rui Marquez on this occasion. He's actually been praised by a couple of the drivers in the pen, the immediate pen post-qualifying, for that decision, because sometimes, maybe in the past, the race director just might have let them say, get on with it. On this occasion, given this is a semi-street track in some respects, the conditions were determined to be just too hazardous to continue. Great call. We had a 24-minute delay. There was another couple of laps behind the safety car. These were actually determined as start of the race. And whilst we had those 2 laps, Rui Marquez then decided, is it going to be a standing start or rolling starts? He made a standing start, Paul. That was another good decision as well. And then, as you say, the race unfolded, and it was going to be one of those, because the rain had passed and there was no more forecast, we were going to see pit stop mayhem in a sprint, which, as you know, folks, we do not ordinarily get, because one set of tyres will last through the 1/3 distance race. So when it was a case of going from the inters to the slicks, lots of incidents unfolded. It played into the hands of Lando Norris. That enabled him to get the victory just ahead of his McLaren teammate, Oscar Piastri.
And of course, it was actually Kimi Antonelli who started the sprint race from pole position, but I mean, led for a matter of seconds, tumbled from 1st to 4th at the first corner. Following almost a coming together with him and Oscar, it was very quickly brushed as no further investigation. Rightly so in my eyes. For those who are watching, of course, let us know your thoughts in the comments. But it was looking set to be an Oscar sprint win. Yes, of course, Lando was catching on the intermediates towards the points when, of course, switching to dry tyres. But as Oscar was in the lead, McLaren did decide, obviously, to pit him first, which under normal circumstances, given it is a sprint race, would have seen Oscar win quite comfortably. No, Liam Lawson, Fernando Alonso colliding. Fernando being really, the victim in this case, had nothing he could do with Liam going into the side of him, resulting in a significant amount of damage for Fernando. Remarkable that Aston Martin turned it around for qualifying, in fact. But the driver that came out laughing at the end of it, Lando Norris.
Just as he did in last year's Grand Prix, of course, because we know here a safety car played into his hands, and that allowed him to gain his first career victory in Formula One. 12 months on, here we go again. Another safety car situation, as you say, Nick. And that allowed Lando Norris to get the jump on Oscar Piastri in that round of pit stops. And of course, unfortunately for the fans here that watch in public, quite naturally, it had to end that way behind the safety car. It's never the way we like to see any race, be it a sprint or a Grand Prix. But of course, this was just the way the circumstances played out on this occasion. At that particular stage, we had Max Verstappen in fourth position. And decent points for Max. He'd actually managed to crawl his way up to third. Bearing in mind, as you mentioned, what happened with that turn one incident between Antonelli and Piastri. Poor Antonelli had to take to the runoff area to avoid a collision with Oscar. And then when he came back on track, he got no momentum. Oscar had obviously got past, Lando got past, and Max managed to surge ahead and was running in third position. Max was overtaken on track by a superb Lewis Hamilton in the sprint. Lewis made a brilliant haul to switch to the inters very early on. That allowed him to make a pass on Max to get third position. Max was running in fourth. However, one of those pit lane incidents that came to light was, of course, Max being unsafely released into the path of poor old Kimi Antonelli. It was not a sprint race to remember for him of whole. We saw the front left of Max's car hit the right rear of Antonelli's Mercedes. We saw the wheel cover completely shattered, debris all over the pit lane. But what that meant was that Antonelli was unable to make his pit stop. He had to go around again. That meant he didn't finish in the points at the checkered flag. Poor Kimi, as I say, and Max got a 10-second penalty for unsafe release. As the race finished behind the safety car, Max, who was fourth, at those 10 seconds, was demoted to 17th and last. So quite an afternoon, quite a day for Max Verstappen, going from last in the sprint race to first in qualifying, which I know we're going to get onto next.
And of course, something else we didn't expect was Lewis Hamilton to be on the sprint podium in third, because actually, yes, he had really good pace on the slick tyres at the end of the sprint, but on the intermediates was kind of nowhere. A story of Ferrari's weekend, really, when it's been difficult conditions. But that was really, in many ways, I think the biggest surprise of the sprint, the fact that, long and behold, Lewis in third.
He was bemoaning early on that he couldn't turn the car. Yeah. The pace just wasn't there, as you say, on those inters. As I mentioned, it was his call, not the team, to say, bring me in, guys. Ferrari, once again, we know they've been working their pit stop magic over the course of this season so far. They've been conducting the fastest pit stops, Grand Prix after Grand Prix after Grand Prix. They turned Lewis around in super quick fashion. Mega job, said Lewis over the radio to his team. That enabled him to really get the march on his rivals behind him, because, as I say, that allowed him then to surge forward up the rankings. He made a great pass on Max Verstappen during the race itself before the safety car came out. And as you say, on the podium for the second sprint race this year as well, because, of course, Lewis won from pole in Shanghai. So good points for Lewis in the sprint, at least good points for Ferrari. But once again, come qualifying, and yes, we are going to get onto it in a couple of minutes, hopes. Ferrari's nowhere. Sheer lack of pace over one lap. Neither Charles Leclerc nor Lewis Hamilton able to extract anything out of that car, both in the same boat during qualifying, leaving them with another uphill struggle going into the Grand Prix on Sunday.
Just to summarize how crazy the sprint race was, we didn't actually get the official final classification until qualifying had actually started. That kind of summarizes how crazy it was. So eventually, these were the top 8 the points finishers, should I say, from the sprint. Lando Norris acclaimed a sprint victory ahead of Oscar Piastri, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, Lance Stroll in 5th, Yuki Tsunoda in 6th, Kimi Antonelli in 7th, and Pierre Gasly picking up 1 point in P8. Moving on to qualifying in, at this point, the rain, for the time being, had long gone away. We had a dry qualifying in the end, and Max Verstappen, as you pointed out, went from, well, finishing last in the sprint race to really surprising McLaren, in particular, you've got to say, in qualifying, especially based on how dominant Oscar Piastri looked in Q2.
Yes, it was one of those sessions for Oscar. Q3 just did not work for him. He came up with a multitude of reasons why it wasn't his session in particular. A poor execution, he made mistakes. The car had changed from Q2 into Q3. And hence, he wasn't even in the top 3. He's going to start 4th on the grid for the Grand Prix. Behind Max on pole, Lando Norris joins Max on the front row. That's going to be a fascinating duel going into turn one, that's for sure, bearing in mind what we saw, as I mentioned, between Oscar Piastri and Kimi Antonelli going into turn one. Are we going to get a little bit of a repetition of nobody's going to give way going into that corner, as we saw at the last Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia, of course, and that was quite a bone of contention that emerged from that Grand Prix. So, and then Kimi Antonelli third. So a bit of redemption for Kimi. Just another note, quickly moving back to him into the sprint before we get into qualifying. Kimi had actually finished 10th at the checkered flag, but because of those penalties for Alex Albon, Liam Lawson,
Ollie Behrman,
thank you.
I mean, the list goes
That's
on.
it. No, those three. Those three.
Just
so
those three.
Albon, Lawson, and Behrman.
Yeah.
It meant that Kimi, who had finished 10th at the flag, managed to get back into the points with 7th position. And then, come qualifying, he proved that Friday evening for sprint qualifying was not a one-off. Okay, it was not the pole position that he scored that allowed him to become the youngest pole sitter in Formula One history across any format. But nevertheless, he was there again, really. And I think it was 2,000th of a second behind Lando Norris. That's how close he was to being on the front row again. So overall, Kimi's had a tremendous weekend so far. Can he now top it off and go one better, perform better? And because, as I mentioned, that turn one incident has been his only blip so far over what has been a great Miami Grand Prix weekend for the 18-year-old.
For Max, though, it's remarkable because once again, he's had good pace throughout the weekend, not really been able to match the McLarens or Kimi Antonelli in particular, and even in qualifying Q1, Q2 didn't look like he'd be competing for pole position, maybe second row at best, and then all of a sudden, despite even making a mistake at the first corner on his final lap, still putting in a time which, in the end, the McLarens and obviously Antonelli just couldn't get close to.
No, look, we know what Max is capable of in that over one lap. I mean, we've doffed our cap many times, in particular already this season, because, we keep hearing about the faults, the issues with this RB21. And once again, it's Max delivering over and above the capacity of the car. The key thing now is for Max, can he keep the McLarens at bay? Can he keep Kimi Antonelli at bay? Because, I'm sure Kimi is going to be there or thereabouts if he can keep it clean. Funny enough, obviously, when you think about it, Nick, he's got Oscar Piastri alongside him on row 2. Almost a repetition of what we saw at the sprint with those two guys, of course, naturally on row 1 for that particular race. So that's going to be another fascinating duel between those two. Never mind what's going to take place between Max and Lando going into that first corner. Just to add, we don't quite know yet, folks, what the conditions are going to be. We're certainly not expecting a beautiful, bright, sunny day on Sunday. There is going to be a bubble of weather going to be floating around from the start of the Grand Prix. 4 o'clock local time, just to keep you up to date. 9 o'clock UK, 10 o'clock in Europe, of course. And that could play its part yet again, as we saw with the sprint. It could be another, as we saw with the sprint, that was chaotic and classic in many respects for a sprint race, because ordinarily the sprint races become a little bit pedestrian at the front because there's no tyre changes. So at least we saw something a little bit different. If there is this bubble of conditions that could hit the race on Sunday, then that really could play, into creating drama and tension.
The word thunderstorms has been thrown around quite a bit looking ahead to Sunday. So for those who are watching, I would highly recommend keeping an eye on the start time, because as we saw in the sprint race, should the conditions not be good enough, then potentially delay could be put in place. Obviously, only time will tell. And if that does happen, of course, we'll be able to tell you guys over at Racing News 365. Ian, just finally, Ferrari. I mean, the highs of Lewis finishing third in the sprint race to the lows of him being eliminated in Q2. P12 for Lewis, P8 for Charles Leclerc. But both of them, I mean, Lewis went from almost elation to deflation. It's remarkable, isn't it, what's going on?
Well, in this case, we were expecting the worst of Lewis
Yeah.
Hamilton coming
Yeah.
into the media pen. But in fairness, it was actually okay. It was in reasonable spirits. And you mentioned P8 and P12 at the end of Q2 for Charles and Lewis. 0.058 seconds separated those four positions. That gives you some idea just how close it was. Isaac Hadjar in the Racing Bulls was 11, just ahead of Lewis. He was 0.020 seconds ahead of getting into Q3. So very, very fine margins. And both Lewis and Charles at least experiencing the same thing on this occasion. In this case, this wasn't Lewis looking introspectively and kind of beating himself up a little bit, saying, I'm not performing with the car, etc. I'm not quite feeling it with the car. No, both he and Charles saying the same thing, that they are getting the absolute maximum out of that car. On Thursday, Charles Leclerc had turned around and said that over the course of the Grand Prix this season, he's been having to make extreme changes to the car to try and get it in a working window. Once again, going into qualifying, he mentioned that he had to make extraordinary changes to try and elevate the performance of that car. He got out the car thinking, I've delivered a good lap. I know as a driver, I could not have done any more on that lap. It's just the car has not got the pace within it to deliver the time to challenge the Red Bulls, well, Max Verstappen in particular, of course, the McLarens and the Mercedes. This is leaving Ferrari languishing down the grid, and with it all to play for going into pretty much every Grand Prix with this season, just to try and drag a handful of points out of a race.
Absolutely. Just to very quickly run through the top 10 on the grid for the Miami Grand Prix. It is Max Verstappen on pole position with Lando Norris in second, Antonelli in third, Piastri fourth, George Russell in fifth. A brilliant performance by Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon to secure sixth and seventh ahead of Charles Leclerc in P8. Esteban Ocon also absolutely brilliant in P9 for Haas, with Yuki Tsunoda in P10 for Red Bull. Ian, amazing stuff as always. To those watching, please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, let us know your thoughts on the sprint race and qualifying in the comments below, and do join us after the race. It's going to be a good one on Sunday. See you later.
Thanks for your support as always, folks. Keep watching and listening. Take care until Sunday.